Welcome to our Meet the Experts costume design panel. Today we are joined by Emma Fryer from Lady Chatterley's Lover, Marci Rodgers from Till, and Quita Alfred from Women Talking. Thank you all for being here. First, I would love to know, when did each of you first have an interest in fashion and clothes? Let's start with Emma.
Very, very early on, I always had an interest in clothes. I was, when I had jobs when I was very young, going back to an age of about 14, I was a very sort of considered shopper because I'd always save my money to buy just one item of clothing that was very special, rather than buying lots of items of clothing that were less sort of money, really. I think when I was still in my sixth form at school, I've got a funny caricature drawing that somebody's dad did of me for my birthday, and I think I just had a style that was very much my own style, not necessarily following any particular sort of fashion, but just putting clothes together in a way that was my own way, which was maybe a little bit quirkier or different to other people. That goes back quite a long. So yeah, that's in the 80s, and I guess I'm very much an 80s child, and the 80s was such an amazing time for clothing and fashion. And I did have a partner at the time who made his own clothes, wore lots of makeup, and probably influenced me quite a lot, actually, in regards to fashion on the high street now changing so much that you can buy clothes very much a lot cheaper. And in the 80s, people still very much sort of made their own clothes and put their own sort of stamp on how they looked in a very different way. And I think that probably did have a very big influence on me as a sort of young person growing up in the UK.
Mm-hmm. I feel like a lot of kids do that too, like just kind of experimenting when just dressing up, like if like their parents don't pick up too. So
yeah, I think it's oh sorry.
Go ahead.
I think people made clothes more, even if they didn't make clothes well. They really did put clothes together very differently. And I think now we have all these amazing sort of vintage shops and high street shops, and I think people are still incredibly creative with putting clothes together, but perhaps we didn't have the choice there wasn't the choice that we have now on the high street. So people were slightly more creative in a very different way.
Marci, how about you? Did you make your own clothing back when you were a kid too?
No, I actually was influenced by, I'm an 80s baby, so I was influenced by the music at that time and the fashion that was coming out of New York. And at that time, I was more so, looking at the fashion magazine 17, which I'm clearly telling my age, and Vogue, Teen Vogue, but truly like the hip hop magazines, and giving honor right now to Misa Hilton, who was integral in creating the brand of Lil' Kim, Notorious B.I.G., Puff Daddy. I've said it before, I grew up in Chicago, so I had a lot of inspiration from my father. My father, I can say since I've been alive, I've never seen my father in a pair of jeans, ever. My dad does not own a pair of jeans. And he custom makes all of his clothes down, it's truly from his hat down to his shoes. So I had that creative sense. I kind of had my own identity, if you will. When I was in high school, I was voted best dressed. I had no idea that I wanted to be a costume designer, but I wanted to be in fashion, whatever that meant at the time. So yeah, it was really what the hip hop culture was influencing. And then I got exposed, obviously, to thrift stores, as Emma has said. And I remember coming home as a young adult with bags of clothes because the thrift stores were like 10 cents in Chicago at the time, and fabric. And my mom would be like, please stop bringing these clothes here. And I had no recollection of the era, so to speak. And it's funny now because when I go visit my parents' house, my mom has a bit of a walk-in closet of some of the things that I've required and kind of inspired her to get. And I think to myself, you wanted me to stop, but now you kind of took the baton. So it was a mosh podge of things. But I would say truly, if I was to send you photos of my teenage years, it's definitely, Aaliyah, TLC, and the hip hop culture.
For sure. It's the best dressed. Wow. I was voted nothing in high school. So Quita, how about you?
I will unabashedly say that Barbie was my muse from the time I was
I respect that.
4 years old. My mom taught me to hand sew when I was about 4 or 5. I think so she could sleep on Saturday afternoons and I would do something. And I remember having a biscuit tin full of scraps and beads. I had a lot of beads and sequins left over from dance recital costumes and things like that. And I would put things together for Barbie and all her friends. And they were very well dressed. And it just kind of went from there. On my mom's side, her mom kept a lot of family garments from ages ago. And I was always fascinated by what we would call period garment, vintage, right? And on the other hand, I used to my dad had a lot of his own stuff still from when he was a young man and from the 50s. When he was a stylish young thing. And I just remember putting on, for example, a crisp white, imagine 100% cotton. I know both of you other costume designers can appreciate that, the difference in an old piece of fabric. And I was fascinated by that, by the difference between garments from back in the day and modern ones. It just went from there. I was always the weird. I wasn't the best dressed, Marci, at school. I was the weirdest. It's what they called it at my school. I remember wearing that same white shirt with a big baggy pair of pants and pumps. This would have been in the late 70s, I guess. I was in junior high, mid 70s. And people thinking I was out of my mind, and I thought I was fabulous. But none of the rest of them are on this panel today, so I guess that worked.
But again, you're a trendsetter, so it's like these things always come back into fashion anyway.
Yeah, I was just fascinated by clothing from a very early age.
Yeah, I was curious about how you guys go about addressing background artists, and just I feel like when audiences watch films, like, obviously the main characters are foregrounded, but if it's like a big scene, you still obviously need to dress her in the background appropriately for the scene. And I was thinking about Till with like the wake, and dressing all those background actors, and also in Woman Talking, just a ton of polyester dresses, not just the 8 women in the barn. How do you guys go about that, and just applying the same attention to detail for extras? Marci, let's start with you.
I mean, for the wake, one of the things that Shanyonya and I talked about was that it needed to feel real. And I mentioned this before. I tried to get as many photos as possible from each angle. I didn't want it to be too. I don't want to say this. I didn't want it to be to the point where every band had on a fedora. Right? Like, where was this person coming from? Were they coming from work? How did they even hear about the wake? And broadly, my process was to assign a bit of a backstory. And the wake, I think, is a broader scene, but what I really appreciated was how Money, Mississippi looked, and how the background looked in Money, Mississippi. And how they didn't feel dated. They kind of felt like, as I've said earlier, like there was a migration, if you will, of fashion, and truly just exemplifying Black excellence. And that was important to me. When I did the pulling of the costumes, obviously I had a team and I would like to thank each of them for their hard work. But I did go through each of the racks that were pulled at Western Costumes and other costume houses and pull out what I felt just based off of the information that I immersed myself in for months and days and hours that may not have fit the overall world, because you start with the overall world and then you extract, or at least I extract based off of character and background.
Mm-hmm, for sure. Quita, how about you?
I love dressing background. I love it. Whether it's for my own show or I've worked on many shows where I've been not a background coordinator, but definitely a fitter for thousands and thousands and thousands. And I love it. I like to do 3 or 4 at a time. There have been many shows where we've done 70, 80 fittings a day with teams, and I love to just get everybody started and watch them play against each other and see how, what the vibe is in the room. And given the whether it's my own show or whether I'm being instructed by another designer, I really love it because their background is so important to the feel of a film, and because it can be seamless and you don't notice it, but you're enjoying the film and it paints a picture and it's beautiful, or it can be really jarring, which is when we haven't done our job correctly. But I find the enthusiasm of the people that do that kind of work is infectious. And it's almost like painting. I keep making this gesture, but I love it. I love getting all of them together and having a room full of clothes. It's almost like, getting a bunch of your girlfriends are getting ready for a dance or something. Everybody.
Yeah. It's like a high school dance. It's like everyone.
Yeah, everybody contributes. I really love it. And it's such an important element. And you can say a lot too. You can differentiate. You can have your lead characters stand out, or you can tell a different story by blending them. You can tell a story about anachronisms, things that work in a good way and things that don't, things that are jarring. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love it. I love doing big crowds.
Yeah. Emma, how about you?
I think I very much agree with what's been said already, and what you said, Joyce, about attention to detail, because you never, you're painting a whole picture of, you are painting pictures with your main cast and your background, definitely. The process for me is still the same. I would still use the same process and still do the same research that I would do for my main cast, and then put boards together. And then on Lady Chatterley, we had very clear, I guess in terms of that, we had very clear, distinct worlds that we were creating. We had the world of London and the wedding, and then we went to the countryside, which was a very different look. And then from the countryside, we went to Venice. And the color palette changed within those different worlds, and the fabrics changed within those different worlds, and the seasons changed. So that was very much reflected in the costuming of our background. But to just be, we at the very beginning, once I was sort of clear with where I was going with palette and the different worlds, then we actually put each world on stands. Before then, the crowd were actually costumed, and then that was something. Then I was able to, that was sent out to our DOP. I was very much able to chat to Law, the director, about it. So that's how it worked on that job very specifically. But again, I think every job, the background they are really important, and attention to detail with background is as important as your main cast, because you never know where the camera is going to go, and it could you may end up having somebody in the background who's really very well featured. So it's so important that you're really happy with everyone from top to bottom, and that you've really sort of clearly thought that through, and you've got a very clear head, and it's communication in regards to the team around you, and because I like to be part of fittings, but then I might not be able to be there the whole time. So then, as Quita said, you might have another team who are actually sort of doing your crowd fittings. So then it's being part of it at the beginning, setting up the tone and the feel of those costumes, and then letting people have fun, because as Quita said, actually costuming background it's really it can be really creative and it's really enjoyable. So if as a designer you've given people a lovely, wonderful visual, and I think it is a lot of fun costuming background. And we had loads of little children in Lady Chatterley, and it was just great watching them coming in. Putting them in period costume is actually really interesting, because it's just a world they're so unfamiliar with, and you know what, it was just lovely. It's lovely actually, and when you see people in period costume and they've never worn it before and they come out, they're happy. People are really happy when they've got a great costume.
Yeah, because it's like dress up. Because like you said, we don't wear this in everyday modern life. So well, lastly, before Quita and we were talking, those doors behind you, they're from a set. They're from Total Recall, which you've worked on. So I was wondering, have you guys ever saved any costumes from any of the films you've worked on? Quita, let's go to you. Yeah.
I'm trying to think. Probably pieces. I'm trying to think of specific things. Usually there's something sentimental about it. It's not so much about the artistry sometimes or the works, although I will try and save pieces like that, but it's something that reminds me of how the actor felt while they were in it, something that I will keep. Like, for example, on Women Talking, Sheila McCarthy had, we called it the ducks. She had a little hanky tucked in her sleeve all the time that was really Greta. It just was a little subconscious touch. She knew it was there, and I think she used it once or twice on camera. But little things like that I will keep. Sometimes it's a bit too much of a busman's holiday for me, so I'll go for a set piece rather than, I don't want to see any costumes after a while.
Right.
I want to be remembered, but little things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Marci, how about you?
I have a mirrored. My first production was She's Gotta Have It, with Spike. So I have a infamous coat that Nola Darling wore. That will always remind me of my starting point. But truly, what like Quita said, you get to a point where you just, after a while, you just want to not think about it. In a good way, though. It's like you came, you saw, you conquered. But I do have, and I do try to keep fabric swatches just so that I can always keep myself up to date with fabric that was in certain eras. I do have, some things. My filmography, I like to say I've been a part of productions that are heroes without capes, Black Klansmen. Mm-hmm. And having to have certain fabrics there for different characters. But Quita also mentioned a point just now about a costume that I have access to for Don Cheadle when I did No Sort of Move with Soderbergh. And that's pretty precious to me because he wanted to reshoot the opening scene after we had been filming for 6 weeks because he didn't feel like he was his character until that moment. And then more so now for Till, I still have some of the hand-beaded prototypes of her dress. And, they bring back memories. You always go back into that moment of emotion or what you're trying to evoke. So it's a few. But then I also have like some costumes of commercials that I've done. Like I have a costume for Serena Williams when I did the Michelob commercial for it was her and Peyton Manning, and that's kind of cool, just to have that and just be like, oh, Serena had this on. So yeah,
just a little stuff here or there. Emma, how about you?
I was just thinking, I feel, because at the end of a job you often have to pack it up, and then it sort of goes in a box, and then it belongs to the production company who made the film. I do have some amazing little prototype crowns that were made out of papier-mâché, that were made on the grate, actually, that never got used, and they were just so beautiful. I really did want to keep them. I don't have any costumes as such. On Lady Chatterley, Matthew, who was cast as Sir Clifford, I think he would like to, all his suiting was tailored for him, and I think he very much wanted to keep that.
It's always the actors who want to
it's
keep
more
it. Yeah.
I think, it's an interesting thing, Joyce, whether cast, because sometimes I think cast get to the end of a job and they've lived through that character, and then that they actually don't want to necessarily keep it. It's different certainly on a contemporary show. On a period show, I think so the suiting was tailored for Matthew, so it wouldn't fit anyone else, and they were beautiful. So in terms of him keeping them, it seemed completely the right thing to do, really.
Yeah.
But no, I don't have a wardrobe full of costumes in my
you all just, when you're done, you need a break from the clothes when you're done with it.
It would be great for dressing up, going out, if I did. But
technically, the studio, like she said, they it's their likeness thereof. So we can't necessarily take the costumes. If there's extra fabric, I would try to make another costume, just for like reminiscing sake. But it belongs to the studio.
It belongs to them. It's not yours. Yeah.
Right. And so when we see our beautiful hard-on creations in certain areas, it's like, we have those moments, but with all due respect, it does go to the studio.
Yeah. Well, it was great speaking with all of you. Thank you so much for your time, and congratulations on all of your projects. There's gorgeous creations and wonderful films. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.